Most of us are taught to associate power with volume, that the loudest voice in the room is the one with the most influence, that to lead, you must be seen, that to win, you must shout, but that's not always true. I want to talk to you about a different kind of power, a quieter kind, the kind that doesn't come from a microphone, a title, or a social media following, the kind that doesn't need applause to know it made an impact. It's the power of silent women. I'm not talking about women who are silenced. I'm talking about women who choose silence as their strength, women who lead without spectacle, who nurture without needing recognition, who endure, influence, and transform without ever raising their voices. Growing up, I watched a woman like that every day. She wasn't on a stage, she wasn't on TV, she didn't have a corner office or a trending post. But she had presence. You felt her before she spoke. Sometimes she didn't speak at all, but when she did, everyone listened because her silence wasn't absence, it was intention. Every word she chose had weight. Every action meaning. She didn't react, she responded. And in a world full of noise that made her magnetic, silent women win differently. They win by listening deeply, seeing clearly, and choosing wisely. They win not through domination, but through devotion, not through charisma, but through consistency, and the most powerful among them, they don't need to be heard to be felt . We often celebrate the bold, the brave, the loud, but let's not overlook the woman in the room who's just watching, the one who doesn't interrupt, the one who takes her time. She's not behind, she's preparing, and when she acts, because she always does it with precision and purpose. Not for attention, but for impact. So let's redefine what it means to win. Let's recognize the silent strategist, the quiet architect, the unshakable woman who leads not with noise, but with nerve. Because in a world that moves too fast, sometimes the greatest strength is stillness. And in a world full of voices, the rarest power is the one that doesn't need to speak to be heard. We live in a world where visibility is often mistaken for value. From a young age, we are conditioned to believe that if we want to be heard, we must speak louder. That success belongs to those who raise their hands first, speak the fastest, and occupy the most space in the room. This belief is reinforced by our media, our schools, our workplaces, where extroversion and charisma are often mistaken for competence and leadership. But power isn't always loud. In fact, some of the most influential people don't command attention with volume. They command it with presence. They don't need to dominate conversations to lead them. They don't need the spotlight to make an impact. Their power comes from a deeper place, clarity, confidence, and conviction that doesn't rely on external validation. There's a quiet strength in being able to stand in a room full of noise and choose not to add to it. A silent woman who holds her ground without needing to prove herself can change the dynamic of an entire room. She doesn't rush to fill silence with words. She waits, she watches, and she speaks only when there's something worth saying. That kind of restraint doesn't come from fear, it comes from self-assurance. It's easy to speak when everyone else is. It's harder to stay silent and trust that your silence says enough. This kind of power can be uncomfortable to those who don't understand it. In a world that moves fast and rewards quick responses, those who move with intention are often misunderstood. But the truth is, their influence often runs deeper. Loud power might grab your attention, but quiet power earns your respect. It lingers, it builds trust over time, it transforms without needing a stage. Think of the women who lead in their families, in their communities, in their teams, who may never raise their voice, yet somehow everything around them rises because of them. Their leadership doesn't scream, it resonates, and it's often more enduring than the flashier kind, because it's rooted not in ego, but in purpose. To embrace the idea that power isn't always loud is to challenge one of our most ingrained cultural myths. It requires us to expand our definition of strength and success. It calls us to pay attention, not just to who is speaking, but to who is watching thinking and waiting . Because sometimes the strongest voice in the room isn't the one you hear first. It's the one you remember long after the noise fades. And when we start recognizing that kind of power, not only in others, but within ourselves, we begin to build a world that honors depth over display and impact over impression. Silence is often misunderstood. In many cultures and systems, silence is equated with submission, weakness, or lack of confidence. When a woman is quiet, people tend to fill in the blanks for her, assuming she is shy, uncertain, or incapable of contributing meaningfully. But that assumption is deeply flawed. Silence is not always a void. Sometimes it is a strategy. Sometimes it is the most powerful choice a woman can make. There is a vast difference between being silenced and choosing silence. To be silenced is to have your voice taken from you. But to choose silence is to exercise control, to decide that not every situation demands your energy or your words. This distinction is critical, especially in a world that so often demands women prove themselves over and over just to be taken seriously. Choosing silence can be a radical act of self-possession. When a woman chooses silence, she is not retreating, she is reclaiming. She is choosing to observe more than she reacts. She is choosing to listen more than she speaks. And in doing so, she often sees what others miss. She hears the unsaid. She notices the tension behind words, the dynamics beneath the surface. Her silence becomes a form of intelligence, a tool that gives her an advantage others don't even realize exists. There is power in that pause, in that restraint. In a meeting where everyone scrambles to have the first answer, the silent woman waits. She doesn't speak until she has something real to say. When she does speak, her words carry weight, not because she's louder, but because she's more deliberate, and that deliberateness earns her influence. People listen, not because she demands it, but because they know she doesn't waste words. When you speak with purpose, people start paying closer attention. Choosing silence also creates space for reflection, for clarity, and for intention. It's a way of stepping back from the rush to be seen and stepping into alignment with what truly matters. In that space, a woman can connect with her inner voice, which is often drowned out by the noise of expectations, criticism, and comparison. That inner voice, once heard, is where true confidence lives, not the performative kind, but the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. And perhaps most importantly, silence can be a form of resistance. In a world that expects women to be constantly available, agreeable, and accommodating, choosing silence can be a way of setting boundaries. It says, I don't owe you a reaction. It says, I will not perform for your comfort. That kind of silence is not passive, it's active. It's courageous. It's a woman standing firmly in her own presence without needing to explain or defend it. So, when a woman chooses silence, do not mistake it for emptiness. It is not absence. It is not a gap to be filled. It is a declaration of self-trust, of strategy, and of strength. In a world that constantly demands performance, there is something quietly revolutionary about a woman who leads with presence instead of spectacle. We've been conditioned to equate leadership with showmanship. The person who talks the most, gestures the widest, or claims the most space is often assumed to be in charge. But presence is something deeper, something more grounded. It doesn't shout, it doesn't dazzle, and yet it commands a room. True presence is felt before a word is spoken. It's the calm in someone's demeanor, the certainty in their stillness, the unspoken confidence in how they carry themselves. A woman who leads with presence doesn't need to dominate a conversation to influence it. She doesn't have to seek attention because her energy naturally draws it. People sense that she knows who she is, and that kind of inner clarity is magnetic. Presence is not performative. It doesn't rely on theatrics or trying to be someone you're not. Instead, it's rooted in authenticity. A woman with presence is grounded in her values, connected to her purpose, and secure in her identity. She doesn't chase approval. She doesn't need to prove her worth. That quiet certainty radiates outward and shapes how others respond to her. People listen not because she forces them to, but because they want to. This kind of leadership is often underestimated. In a society where visibility is often confused with value, those who don't clamor for the spotlight can be overlooked. But presence isn't about being visible in the conventional sense. It's about being unforgettable. It's about showing up fully, even when you're not the loudest person in the room. It's about the integrity you bring to every moment and the way you make people feel when they're in your orbit. Consider the silent woman in a boardroom, a classroom, or a family setting. She may not speak often, but when she does, her words shift the conversation. Her ideas aren't performative, they're purposeful. Her stillness isn't passive, it's perceptive. People may not immediately notice her, but they remember her. Not for what she said, but for how she made them think. Not for how she acted, but for what she represented. This is the power of presence. It lingers. Long after the noise fades and the performances end, presence remains. It is the steady anchor in a chaotic world. It's what people come back to when they need guidance, honesty, and calm. It's what makes silent women quietly powerful. Not because they insist on being followed, but because others want to follow them. Presence over performance is not a retreat from leadership. It's a return to its essence. It reminds us that real influence doesn't need spectacle. It simply needs truth, clarity, and the courage to show up fully, without needing to be loud to be seen. In a world that rewards quick responses and constant noise, the value of listening and wisdom is often underestimated. We are surrounded by an urgency to speak, to have an opinion, to take a stand, to react. But silent women operate differently. They lead not by being the first to speak, but by being the last to need too. Their strength lies not in controlling conversations, but in understanding them, and that makes them powerful in ways that often go unnoticed, until their insight changes everything. Listening is not passive. It's one of the most active forms of engagement, and silent women have mastered it. While others rush to contribute, they observe. They pay attention to tone, to body language, to what is not being said. They read the room with an emotional intelligence that many overlook. Because they don't rush to speak, they make room for deeper understanding, and from that understanding, wisdom emerges. Silent women take the time to absorb information before responding. Their silence is not hesitation. It is reflection. They are not distracted by the pressure to perform or impress. They don't just hear words, they grasp meaning. And because they listen more than they talk, when they do choose to speak, their words carry more weight. People tend to lean in when someone who rarely speaks finally decides to contribute. Not because of volume, but because of value. Wisdom is rarely loud. It's not found in impulsive reactions or in dominating others. It comes from discernment, from knowing when to act, and just as importantly, when not too. Silent women demonstrate this through their restraint. They understand that not every battle is worth fighting, not every comment deserves a response, and not every situation requires their energy. This doesn't make them weak, it makes them wise. Leadership through wisdom is sustainable. It doesn't burn out from overexertion. It doesn't rely on being constantly seen or heard. It's a long game built on trust and insight. Silent women often influence decisions behind the scenes, guiding teams, families, or communities with a subtle hand. Their impact isn't always obvious in the moment, but it becomes clear over time. People begin to seek them out, not for validation, but for clarity. This is the kind of leadership the world desperately needs. Not reactionary leadership, but thoughtful leadership. Not louder voices, but wiser ones, and wisdom often belongs to those who have learned to be comfortable in silence, to wait, to watch, and to weigh what truly matters. So while the world races toward noise, silent women move differently. They lead from a place of deep knowing. They listen not to reply, but to understand. And through that understanding, they shape the world quietly, but powerfully, because in the end, those who listen best often lead best. And wisdom, though it may whisper, always leaves an echo. Leadership, for much of history, has been defined through a narrow lens, commanding authority, speaking with assertiveness, taking up space, and visibly directing others. But there is another, often overlooked form of leadership that is quieter, subtler, and deeply transformative. It's the leadership of silent women. These are the women who don't seek the front of the room, but whose presence shapes its entire atmosphere. Their strength doesn't rely on recognition, applause, or visibility. They lead from within, often without titles, and their influence can be profound. To redefine leadership is to understand that impact is not always about public displays of power. Sometimes it's about quiet acts of courage. Sometimes it's about the consistency of showing up, doing the work, and doing it well, without needing validation. Silent women lead by example. They model resilience, patience, and dignity in their everyday actions. And in doing so, they create a kind of trust that cannot be manufactured by charisma alone. These women might not be the ones giving speeches or making bold declarations, but they are the ones people turn to in moments of uncertainty. They create stability, they offer clarity, they listen deeply and respond with empathy. Their leadership is rooted in service rather than ego, in responsibility rather than performance. That makes them dependable and deeply respected, even if they are not always loudly acknowledged. In a culture that often mistakes volume for value, we must pause and look more carefully at who is truly leading. Is it the one speaking the most, or is it the one who others quietly rely on for wisdom and strength? Leadership doesn't always look like someone at the front of the stage. Sometimes it looks like the woman who makes space for others to speak. Sometimes it's the one who mentors quietly, encourages behind the scenes, or uplifts others without demanding credit. These women lead through connection rather than control. They don't need to dominate to be effective. They inspire through integrity, through humility, and through their unwavering commitment to what they believe in. They show us that leadership is not about being seen. It's about seeing others. It's not about speaking the loudest. It's about knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Silent women teach us that strength does not need to shout, that influence does not require a spotlight, that making a difference doesn't always come with a round of applause. They redefine success not as a performance to be judged, but as a legacy to be quietly built. One action, one decision, one relationship at a time. And as more people begin to recognize this form of leadership, the world starts to shift. We begin to value depth over noise. We begin to seek wisdom over performance. We begin to understand that the strongest leaders may be the ones we almost overlooked, until we realize that, quietly, they've been guiding us all along.